Hi, Paul Krugman here. I'm recording this on Tuesday afternoon. I just won't have time to write a normal post for tomorrow when you'll see this. And I would take the day off, except it seemed to me as if people might want some reaction to the carnage that's been going on, at least in part of the tech sector in stock markets around the world, which has been pretty remarkable. It's really tempting to say that it's deeply meaningful. In general, you want to be very cautious about putting too much stake in stock market events. I'll come back to that in a minute. But it is striking enough that it does seem to be worth commenting on. So, what's happened? There's been a fall in tech stocks, very much concentrated in semiconductors. The Philadelphia Semiconductor Index was down almost 8% on Tuesday. The KOSPI Korean Index, which is largely a semiconductor index, was down just about 10%, sort of the previous day or the same day, time zones. And that's, 2.2% fall in the NASDAQ. We've seen a lot of decline in tech stocks, things related above all to chips. What's going on there? Well, part of the answer is that trying to understand why the market does what it does is, generally speaking, a mug's game. In this case, however, it does seem that part of what's happening, probably a large part of what's happening, is that the tone, the rhetoric surrounding uh, use of AI and hence the demand for compute has really shifted quite a lot just very recently. All of a sudden, we have a spate of studies that seem to show that, yeah, AI models allow people to churn out a lot more stuff, but the actual payoff to that stuff is much, much smaller than the volume of stuff that they're turning out. Most obviously lines of code, but just in general, AI lets you do much more, but how productive that is in terms of the ultimate goals of a business, let alone economic growth, the quality of life, is much more doubtful. Um, on top of that, you have the a rather abrupt, jarring turn in business strategy. Up until just the other day, pretty much, a lot of businesses were more or less whipping their workers into using AI. We're going to judge you on how much you're using AI, whether or not you really want to, whether or not you yourself think it's valuable, but we're actually going to score you. We're going to require that you do token maxing. And then with compute getting scarce and with the price of chips having gone through the roof, suddenly the AI companies began charging, and the marginal cost of using a lot of tokens became really, really very high. And suddenly companies were saying, "Oh, wait, stop! We want you to economize on your use of tokens, and hence to ultimately reduce the demand for compute." And that's a sudden U-turn, or at least a sharp turn of some kind, and it naturally has to affect your belief in what the prospects for companies that are largely in the business of making the wherewithal for compute are going to go. Um, this is part of a broader phenomenon, which I'm going to write about very soon, which is that there is a kind of lack of organicness to the AI boom. There are people who are using it because they turn to it, looks great. They're using it because it's fun. I find, I have colleagues who are just mucking around with Claude and finding some uses for it. But there's also a large amount of corporate America thinks that this is the way it has to go. Fear of missing out, not by the individual investor, but by the corporate bureaucracy. And then pressure from the financial markets saying, we will not, your company better be on the cutting edge of AI or else. All of which is very fragile. It's a kind of a bubble, but not in the normal sort of asset price form. It's more of a kind of uh, uh, fads, almost a social delusion. And that seemed likely, certainly got ahead of itself. Now, I'm reading way too much into these stock prices, and so let me give you a little bit of a caution on all of that. So yeah, the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index was down 8% in a day, which is one hell of a drop. It was up 157% over the past year. So you want to have some perspective here. That's after the decline. So this is uh, uh, a stunning setback, but the fact of the matter is that over the course of a year, these stocks have been incredibly high performing. The KOSPI, the Korean Index, was down 10 point, strictly speaking, 9.99%. But anyway, it was down 10%. But after that 10% fall, it was up 172% over the year. So we're not talking about a catastrophe. We aren't even talking about a Bitcoin level of disappointment for investors. But okay, it's a break in the trend. The other thing we should say, the famous old line by my teacher and colleague Paul Samuelson, that the stock market had predicted 9 of the last 5 recessions. There's many more than that now. In fact, just over the course of the past year and a half, we've had 2 major stock market declines that turned out to be false alarms. There was a big decline in April of 2025 after Liberation Day, the Trump tariffs, because there was a lot of people just sort of saying, it's chaos, it's terrible things may happen. And while the tariffs have been a bad thing, they did not cause an economic catastrophe, and the stocks recovered the losses that they experienced then. And then there was another round of major stock declines associated with the Iran war. And of course, the Iran war has been a complete debacle and a disaster, and we'll be paying a price for that for a very long time. But short-run macroeconomics, more modest than many people, myself included, expected. It appears that the Strait of Hormuz is going to gradually reopen because the United States basically said, "Okay, you win." I won't say that, but in practice, that's what we're doing. So that is going to be over. So it's not that uncommon for the markets to react as if something terrible is about to happen and be wrong. So you really don't want to assume. There's a real temptation to assume that because there's so much money involved, a big decline in the markets must be signaling that something is really very much amiss in the fundamentals, that where there's smoke, there's fire. And sometimes, there's just smoke, no fire. So this might not be as big a deal. But it comes at a moment when the rhetoric really has shifted. You can see that there's just a kind of a walking back, and there was a really striking interview uh, just the other day with Satya Nadella of Microsoft. And Microsoft is actually a consumer of AI rather than a producer. They have, you have tools you can use within Microsoft products, but I think they run basically off OpenAI. And Nadella was pretty scathing about saying, we can't give all of this power and all this money to the big AI companies, and we should be using cheaper models, and hinted that Microsoft may start making use of DeepSeek, the Chinese model, which is, less comprehensive. In general, the Chinese models are less comprehensive, but immensely cheaper, and among other things, just do a lot less computation. That's kind of the core of why they're cheaper. And in that case, the picture changes a lot. What bearing does all of this have on AI and the future of the economy, and AI and the future of humanity? Uh, it's possible. Part of what we're seeing may not be so much disappointment in what AI can do as realizing that this extremely compute-intensive AI is not essential. And maybe you can still get whatever the big productivity benefits are, and still possibly the big labor displacing effects without quite so much compute. But it's not entirely separate either. I think we need to be saying that this is what a quasi-bubble, quasi-bursting might look like. That's a lot to read into just a few days stock market action. So take it with a grain of salt. But I thought I should weigh in on it because given that this is what we're all interested in, aside from the latest depredations of, well, he whose name shall not be mentioned, that AI is the really exciting, weird, and troubling thing going on in our economy. Take care.